Hello, I am Deb Coviello, the Drop In CEO. And as always, I'm grateful you've dropped in for another episode where you can listen to these amazing leaders I bring on week after week who share their leadership insights with you. And I know I'm always inspired. You'll be inspired as well. And just know that I do this because I want to provide amazing resources as I partner with C suite leaders to help them navigate their challenges with confidence. And this week, I am thrilled to invite onto the show Marcel Schwantes, who is a speaker, author, acclaimed executive coach, and an Inc. magazine contributing editor with a global following. Marcel delivers presentations, workshops, courses, and coaching programs about the human side of business and how cultures of care, connection, and belonging power companies to thrive and outperform the competition. He also hosts the popular Love in Action podcast, which is heard over 160 countries. And we're also going to talk about his book, Humane Leadership. Marcel, thank you so much for dropping in on the show.
It's such an honor to be here. And I know we've had previous conversations. You came on my podcast. So here I am. We're like back and forth conversations. I love this. There's synergy and there's connection and collaboration.
And yeah, here as well. And again, you're an amazing host. So if you haven't listened to the Love in Action podcast, please check it out. He's an amazing host, a great conversationalist. And a quick shout out to Mitka Ivanov, who has introduced us, the beauty of the network. I am always looking for warm introductions, trusted resources, so I get to interview the most amazing people. And by the way, my listeners have told me they have been amazing. But before I get into this a little bit, I would just love for you to share a bit about yourself, your backstory, so my listeners can get acquainted with you.
No, absolutely. So my origins in the business world came from HR. So came up the ranks through recruitment. I mean, we're going way, way back now. I was a headhunter. Yeah. And then I moved into the corporate space where I started to recruit for other companies, healthcare organizations. And then I decided, oh, you know what, I need a little more education here because I wanted to get into the higher ranks of management. And so I picked up a master's in organizational behavior along the way. And then that led me down a path of seeking more executive level experience. And I signed on to a 2 year human resources administrative residency program at a hospital, a mid-sized hospital on the West Coast. And the intent of that program was to walk me through, to rotate me through all of the areas of HR management. So, so that eventually I would be placed into a manager or a director role to lead HR functions. So that was the intent of the program. Well, along the way, maybe about halfway through, less than that, ran into some issues, and which really is the segue to the rest of our conversation and the book, because I was under a very high pressure, toxic management environment that literally stripped the joy and even I would say the health and well being right out of me. So one day I was taking a shower, getting ready for work. I stepped out of my shower stall and landed straight face down. I just face planted and on the bathroom tile. My back went completely out. I was paralyzed from the waist down. So that was interesting. So in the ER, after my parents at the time came and rescued me and took me to the hospital, the doctor said, "What's your stress level on the scale of 1 to 10?" I said, "Doc, it's a 25." And then he explained the somatic experiences of how so much cortisol released in our bodies and adrenaline when we have that rushing for an extended period of time. It's not sustainable to the body. And so I was on disability, unable to move from the waist down for about 2 months. But then you have the emotional aspect of that, not only the physical recovery, but the emotional recovery. So really I was kind of out of touch with work and all that for about 5 months. So my full recovery. And yeah, and then I came back to the very place that had that environment to finish the program, and I was able to do that. So that that was the silver lining there. I stuck to what I had committed from the start. But then my investigation into why is it that we still have these organizations that lead through such an iron fist through this top-down, very stifling command and control environment where people aren't don't have the freedom to bring their whole selves to work. Because definitely didn't have that freedom. And why is it that we place people in the highest and most esteemed roles in leadership that lead in that manner, very dehumanizing ways? And so my research began, and I got into trying to understand what true leadership was like. That led me through the path down servant leadership. And the more I started to investigate what is all that about, the more of the care aspects of leading started to rise to the surface. And so every time I looked at engagement surveys, engagement studies from Gallup, from other
Yeah.
places, McKinsey and Company, when I would investigate what leads to high performance in teams and whole companies,
Yeah.
I saw the trust piece rise to the top. Well, how do you actually get to the point where people trust their leaders and leaders trust their employees to do really good work, right? So everything started to point back to care. But then as I went further, I just kept digging and digging, I realized that all of the things that I was discovering that lead to human impact are the same things that we may exercise in our communities, in our families, in our own inside our own homes,
Mm.
which really comes down to love. And so love is a very squishy word in the business world, right? So we have to put some context and some guardrails around what that means exactly. So I went further and I started to investigate, well, is there a link between love, not the squishy emotion, not the feeling of love, but the practice of love that leads to impact and results? Is there a link between love and business leadership?
Mm.
And so landed that landed on my framework for the book after I did the research. And so here we
Wow.
are. The book was released. It's called Humane Leadership, and we can talk about what those practices are. But I'll let you lead the way.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay, so my mouth is dropping here because such an impactful story. Um, and for those of you that watch on the YouTube channel, you can see my mouth open. I mean, let's just go back a little bit to that story. So, fortunately, you recovered and you finished and leveraged the best of that program. How much longer did you stay in that environment?
After the 2 year mark,
Right.
I got out of Dodge.
Okay.
I
Thank you.
fulfilled the program,
Okay.
and well, again, the intent was to place me in an HR management role, right?
Yeah.
Well, that hospital didn't want to see me in that role, and so I started to look around under the umbrella of the parent company has many, many hospitals. So I started to see if there were any other hospitals within the network all over the up and down the West Coast for an HR management role. Now that I got the tools,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
groomed in that, and there weren't any. And I think that I can't validate this, but my best guess is that word got around that because I pushed back against the toxic management structure, when you're under a power structure like that, it's very hard
Yeah.
to I mean, you can push back as much as you want or
To a
can, but
point. Yeah.
if the layer at the top dictates that this is the way we're going to be, it's a very hard uphill battle.
Well,
So I think that the word got around that I wasn't a what they say quote culture fit, air quotes culture fit in that environment, and they were 100% correct. I lead through care, and I wanted to see that. I wanted to aspire that in other leaders, but I think that that's what happened. And so there were no openings for me. The doors were shut. I was completely stonewalled, right? So I had to find other ways outside of the network. And a hospital close by had a position open, similar position
Mm,
that was more organizational development, which has elements of HR sprinkled in. And that person that I reported to, who was a high level executive, led completely the opposite of what I had seen for 2 years. And he was a true model for servant leadership. And so I
yeah,
excelled and flourished under that person's leadership. So I grew as a human being, as a professional, as a leader. And so it proved even more of my point that when you are under that kind of leadership, you thrive in your business environment.
yeah.
So that's where I ended up and his name is Bruce. I, you know, he knows the story, so I can freely mention Bruce's name. Bruce became the model for, this higher aspiration of leading human beings.
Yeah, and what I love about that too, just so you know, again, for my listeners, think about the people along the way that either led in a way that was aligned with your values or really cared about your development. Remember those people,
Mm.
give them respect, reach out to them. The person that inspired the drop in CEO framework and mindset, after 20 plus years of that inspiration, I finally reconnected with him and it was the most delightful thing. And I hope to get him on the podcast here. But I do want to go back a bit. And again, this is a watch out for my listeners, cortisol and stress. And I will tell you, in my last corporate job, I wouldn't say it was toxic, but I no longer fit in. And
Uh,
so then there was this struggle, and I was always tense and always on empty, and nothing that I could do, my go to things to relieve that stress weren't working. And so while I didn't, unfortunately, never suffer any physical ailment, I started putting on a lot of weight over the years. And I will say, once I got to a place of, okay, what are my values? Who do I want to be around? Who and what gives me joy? I have been able to realize much better health, not necessarily in weight, but well being, being a better
yeah.
person. And maybe I added a few more years to my life to be able to do that purposeful work. So, again, anybody out there, if you are feeling high levels of stress, take inventory of where you're at and what you do. And even if you cannot leave or change, take incremental steps to move in a different direction.
Mm.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so we are going to dig deep into this. You brought it up, so it's your fault. You talked about toxic leadership, but would love to, okay, toxic. We know it's bad. It's not good for the humans, etc. But you talk about the hidden costs of it. So let's just bring this to brass tacks. Why, if you have it, might it be so significant to your business?
Yeah. Well, I found that as I was doing my research, I ran into an analysis where MIT Sloan Management Review, they looked over 34 million online employee profiles, and they ranked a toxic work culture to be 10.4 times greater than compensation in predicting a company's attrition rate. Imagine that. So the takeaway here, Deb, is that toxicity in the workplace, if you work in such an environment, really represents the primary factor in driving your employees to head for the exits. And so, from if you're listening and you're up in the C-suite, you might want to take a look at this because it's affecting your business and your bottom line. And so, again, it's because what happened to me as an example, under that kind of environment, I was not able to perform at a high level. Well, obviously, if your back is out and you're on disability, you're not going to even be at work. So,
I know.
um, and so imagine a whole team or organization under that kind of stifling environment where you feel like you're just another worker bee, a cog in a wheel. You can use all of those
Yeah.
terms because you're not being given the license to use your full creativity. You're not given access to come to the table and provide input
Yeah.
and suggest ideas and solutions, or even express concerns about things that might be a detriment to decision making. It might be a detriment to how customers are
Yeah,
being treated, et cetera. People on the front lines are way smarter than most leaders think. They're in the front line. If you hire smart and capable employees and you give them the tools and the resources and the support to succeed, they're going to do amazing things for you.
absolutely.
And so why not rely more on your frontline employees to come to them for input, for ideas, for suggestions
Yeah.
and strategies, right? But in a toxic environment, you're not allowed to do that because all of the power is held at the top. And the top likes to control things, people, processes, which then stifles those frontline
Yeah.
employees, from just producing good work and bringing their best selves to work.
One other thing that I can add to what you've already shared is sometimes it's lonely at the top and you don't get all the information. Your leadership can say everything is fine, but I would suggest doing a pressure check because there could be a level of leadership for which perhaps they've not been developed fully as leaders. Perhaps they are scared of losing employees. Perhaps they know no other way of leading others. Might you go down into the rank and file and make sure you don't have a toxic environment or individuals that are creating toxicity, especially
Hmm.
for a smaller company? You may not have all the means of doing a retention survey, but just walk around and look and see if people are looking at you in the eye as you walk
Mm.
through an environment. Have some casual chit chat. Hey, what's going on? What can we do to serve you better? You're going to get a sense from the body language if there is toxicity at some level. And look into that and
Mm.
protect it because you never know. You could be losing money and it's kind of buried someplace else. You don't realize it. So, again, toxic environment, toxic leadership, but also make sure there aren't pockets of toxicity if everything else seems okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I've seen that in smaller companies as well. And it can quietly disrupt what you're trying to do. But
Yeah.
now I want to go back to because you started touching on it in your backstory
Hmm.
about leading to then the constructs of love, not the mushy stuff, but love in business. So you talk about your love in action framework. Can we just dive into that a little bit more so people can understand it, perhaps even
Right.
relate to it?
Yeah. So you can imagine when you're going down the path of finding best practices and the literature to review, well, you might run into some constraints because there isn't enough available data on practical love. But there are, in the term practical love. So there's lots of research on empathy, compassion, and active listening, things like that, right? Kindness. That's all over the place. And those are elements of love. But I wanted to find out, okay, what's the framework for places that are unabashedly practicing love, right? In a practical sense, because now we're removing the fuzzy emotions and the fuzzy feelings. And so what I came to was going back to the Greeks, right? If you remember your studies in high school or college about the Greeks, they define love in, I think, 9 different ways. And one of them that pops out for leadership application in the 21st century that's not going to compromise results, profits, excellence is agape love. And agape love is backed by action. So agape love says, I'm going to remove the obstacles from people's path so that they are set up for success, so that
Yes.
they perform at a higher level. Agape love says, I'm going to advocate on behalf of people. Let's find out what's holding them back. So the question for a manager might be listening right now and saying, my employees just lack motivation. Well, really? So why is that?
Why?
Well, investigate what's in the path of your employees not being more inspired, more motivated. And so you might have to do an assessment. You might have to put out some pulse surveys out there, right, to capture the data, right? And so as I started to delve into the love aspect of leadership, I thought, well, this is interesting. What I took a really off the beaten path way to figure this out. I started to investigate the religious world because there are 2, 3 millennia of religious practices that whatever your religious persuasion is, Christian, Jew, Muslim, the Baha'i faith, whatever it is, there are principles and practices of love in communities that they were, exemplifying what that looks like. So I started to borrow from different places, and I landed in the Bible in an account in the book of Corinthians, and I dissected that passage into five leadership principles. Now I just needed the science to back it up because it was a religious text. Well, will it hold up against science, against literature on organizational development and positive psychology? Well, sure enough, it did. So the five that I was able to come up with from the research is leadership is patient, leadership is kind, leadership is humble, leadership advocates for people, and leadership is trustworthy. And so that became the framework. And now we can back up each of those with the literature in the business world. And we can see all of those in the best practices. Some of the biggest organizations on the planet have all of these elements in how they operate.
And these, when I have seen companies like this in leadership, are often the ones that are a little bit smaller. They've built an amazing culture, and those are the ones I have served and I wish to serve because even one that I'm not serving yet, but during a business trip, I'm stopping by, but they said, yes, we'd love to have you. We'll give you a tour, etc. I said, but not before this time because we're having a celebration, a baby shower for one of our employees, and they celebrate. They all their social media, they are constantly putting up things about the employees. You never saw anything about the senior leadership. It was all about the people. It's like God, there's something there about that environment, and everybody is smiling. Versus sometimes the larger companies become just this monolith of structure. And yes, in larger companies, you need to put more structure and accountability because there's more at risk. But then you lose something about the people and the process and what made them just so successful and so rich. But I appreciate your work.
Mm.
And you've been doing this for some time after you've written the book and applied your framework. What's an example or a situation where you were brought into a team or an organization that was having challenges? What was that transformation like?
One of them, you've heard the term, just came after COVID, quiet quitting. We
Yes,
still
yeah.
hear about quiet quitting. And so I was brought into a client company to understand why people were quitting. And as I did my assessments and interviews, et cetera, uh, it kept coming back to the lack of psychological safety. And more specific to that, because that's even a big term these days, what exactly is psychological safety, right? So I was able to get down to people not being able to ask for help when they needed it because they were afraid. And other people weren't willing to give help because it wasn't a cultural value to be able to give help. So you have the people that were afraid to ask for help because, oh, what are they going to think? I'm supposed to know what I'm doing in my job, so I can't ask for help. And so then that created a lot of, monkey wrenches in the system because when you don't ask for help, it slows things down. And then you're not creating problem solving
Yeah.
opportunities because people are afraid. And then those that weren't willing to give help, and the reason was because, hey, it's the people at the top, they know what they're doing. They're the ones that should address, if somebody is having a problem. It's not my problem as a peer or coworker, right? That's somebody else's problem. I'm just here to do my work. So it's like you create little personal silos and you don't collaborate. It kills engagement. It kills peer-to-peer, collaboration, connection, et cetera. So that's one of the things that I saw that led to disengaging people and even quiet quitting, as an example. There are
Well,
so many others, but there's one
yeah.
that comes to mind.
Yeah, and then again, like you said, you expect, oh, that's just normal attrition. Well, please don't buy into that, because I have seen companies that have been growing because of amazing cultures. Not only do you have the people that have been in there 20, 30, some odd years, and then people, the younger people, just they stay out, they're there for life. So anyway, don't let
Yeah.
people smoke, give you a smoke screen about that's just normal attrition. But I want to make this a little bit more actionable, because I have two demographics that listen to my podcast. There are those leaders that are the C suite leaders, maybe a
Mm.
CEO, a senior vice president. And then there are the demographic of people that are maybe in this environment and they're looking to move up in their career. I'm wondering if there's a senior leader out there that um, is not sure about their culture. And you propose that maybe there's something you can look at in terms of how much love do you have. What are some things that a senior leader could do right now, even without your help, to understand the current state of their organization? And maybe they might need you.
There's a big values deficiency in a lot of organizations. Let's use the example of a startup, like you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier. Like a startup may have great understanding of, their identity, who they
Mm-hmm.
are. They may start with some values, and then they go through all of these inflection points
Mm-hmm.
of maybe enormous growth. And
Yeah.
now they have all these openings they have to fill,
Yeah.
with people that, and then they lose their way because they're bringing in people that may not reflect the same values that the founders
Mm-hmm.
originally intended. This is what's going to drive us forward, right? And so now they lose their identity. And so a lot of times they bring me in. And what I do is I kind of push the reset button on the values piece. It was
Okay.
because I sometimes people, founders, or they shift, they might sell their organization, and then you got new ownership, and then the ownership inherits the values of the original founders, but it's not moving down to the day-to-day level. It's not it These are not practices that are you're not seeing it in action. They're just words on a piece of paper
Yep.
now in the conference room, right? And so I start with, well, let's investigate what your values are. So I ask him, what are your values? And at times it's a very disarming question, because if I have a room of six senior managers sitting around the table, and I say, somebody recite your values verbatim for me. Silence,
Do they know it?
awkward silence.
Yeah.
Most of them don't even have a clue. Some of them may know two of the five. And so, yeah. So I start with, okay, well, let's investigate how to bring those values, and really re-examine them. Do
To
they still
life.
matter to you?
Yep.
Okay. If not, then we need to restructure your organization with these actionable values that create impact down
Mm-hmm.
in day-to-day interaction, in how you interact with your customers and other stakeholders, et cetera. So that's the big piece of the puzzle. And I do that before I even start a leadership development process, because you have to have the values piece in place to be able to know who to hire, who to promote from within, and
Mm-hmm.
even who to fire if they violate those values. Because there should be some non-negotiables there in how you operate through those values.
Yeah, so impactful. And again, I would just say, even for the individual out there, sometimes you're challenged with a challenging environment, a challenging community. Your home life might be out of sync, people that you interact with, friends, family, etc. Take inventory of what your values are and just say, like, what is important to me? What do I
Yeah.
stand for? From a business perspective, I do what I do because I want people to struggle less and spend more time with their family, their friends, themselves, and community. And often when you take stock of what your values are, they become really good anchors for just making good decisions. So that exercise that you talk about for senior leadership, absolutely relevant to
Mm.
individuals as well for their personal. Because if you're struggling, if you're in a toxic environment or situation, getting clear on your values might be a path forward to move away from where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, wow. So writing the book, let's just go there a little bit. And you say
Okay.
it's just releasing, right? What was that like? Like, having written the book, What was that experience like for you? Because again, it's yours and now it's out in the world. What is that experience like? Because I think there's a whole bunch of other people out there that have books in them that should be written.
Yeah. Um, there's a lot of books that talk about bringing human skills to work, and titles like "The Future of Work is Human," et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody is really, well, I wouldn't say nobody, but not enough people are talking about humane, how to
Mm,
act humanely in the world. And leadership is I can't think of a better way to build relationships with coworkers, employees, and your communities at large, your customers, than through very good leadership practices, and the kind of leadership practices that you will filter down to other people below, who will learn by example that this is how you lead organizations, this is how you lead a team. And a lot of those principles and practices are humane when you speak of acting with patience and not running over people, and the failure to really listen to what and
mm,
understand what somebody's going through, right? That's active listening, right? Just stepping into the role of, okay, I'm going to now stop the script in my head that is trying to dictate how this conversation is supposed to go, because I've already made up my mind that this is what my reply will be. No, it's to active listen is to park your thoughts in the moment and be completely present. Turn off your phone, all your notifications, and be present with this person. And the reason that you're doing it is to try to understand first before being understood. Because so much
powerful.
of listening is, well, I got to get my point across. And you're not really listening because you're distracted by your own thoughts trying to
Mm-hmm.
formulate a rebuttal, right?
So my response to this after active listening is it is a challenge as a podcaster because you have a flow, you have things that you want to go over. You're deeply listening so you can respond, but at the same time, I've got the next follow-on question I'd like to ask, but then I say, "Oh, Deb, slow down." Just like, "Oh my God, he's got these great lights behind him and oh my God, he is the energy that's coming out. That's being present." And then I got to be like ready on the okay, next question. So yeah, I totally get the being present and be vulnerable because if you're present, you might not know how to respond, but just feel that energy of that other human and what makes them shine. So again,
Mm.
totally get that. But your energy, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I know it's not the end. I can't wait for this show to air, for my conversation to air. I just, for my listeners, just a quick note before I pass it back to Marcel is that if any of this has resonated with you, if you feel like, oh, yes, I've been in that environment or I'm there right now, whether you're an employee or leadership, I really hope that a lot of what Marcel has shared with you gives you a moment to pause and reflect and say, okay, yeah, that resonates. But then the next thing is, then what are you going to do with that awareness? And might you start looking at his work, his book, check out his website, or maybe there's something actionable you can do right now to move from a toxic situation to one that is more humane. And so, Marcel, I have so enjoyed this
Mm.
conversation, but I'd love to pass it back to you one more time just to share any last thoughts with my listeners.
I think that if I was to sit down with a group of people to figure out, well, first of all, do they truly understand what I mean by practical, radical love? And so that's number one, because you don't want to go down the wrong path of misinterpreting the meaning of the message. Love, in this sense, is actionable. It is done to move mountains in the way of people so that people are liberated from the immense stress and anxieties that they may face every day. Because when you learn to do that, you're going to have amazing, amazing things happen for your business, for your leadership, And and then the greater aspiration is it makes it a better world when we can lead this way and teach others to lead this way. It leads to a better world where we are less divided. There's less infighting and conflict, etc. So I think if I was to task your listeners at the highest levels of management with one action item, it would be this: get curious. Figure out what's happening in your environment and then create the conditions necessary for love and care to happen. But first, you got to get curious, find out what's happening.
Such actionable advice, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed your energy and your passion. I just want to say thank you so much for dropping in on the podcast, and I wish you well and much success.
It's been a pleasure, and just love talking to you. You just have such great energy as well. So I want to acknowledge you for making this conversation, this space happen. So
All right.
thank you.
My pleasure, Marcel. You be well. Thank you.